Well, there are two, I suppose, instantiations of winsomeness that I want to push against. The one is viewing it as nothing more than really an instrument of manipulation or political expediency. You're winsome to get something from somebody else because you have an agenda. The other is, and this one I think is actually more prevalent, it's just a desire to use it so that people will like us.
Hello, and welcome to Thinking Out Loud. I'm your co-host, Nathan Rittenhouse.
And I'm your co-host, Cameron McAllister.
And Cameron, today we're going to introduce people, to a big concept, but the most articulate version of this that we've seen has come through an article by Bethel McGrew in World Magazine. And Bethel is somebody, McGrew, you might, if for you apologetic junkies out there, might know that last name, the daughter of Tim and Lydia McGrew, who are pretty instrumental in a lot of the apologetics world on the more academic side. And so, Bethel, her PhD is in mathematics, but she writes a lot of things. And she's caught your eye, Cameron, on a number of topics. But you recently sent me an article that she wrote for World Magazine. And could you just kind of flesh out what's going on there? Because it's something that we've kind of been poking at, but haven't seen as clearly as she did.
Yes. And I just want to say I have one long-standing beef with Bethel. She thinks that Flannery O'Connor is not great, and she's clearly totally dead wrong about that. So just have to say that.
We'll have to talk to her sometime and get her side of the story on that.
Yeah, that would be fun. She's a very insightful thinker, and her writing is really refreshing. And she's kind of an up and coming voice. So do check her out. We'll drop these notes. We'll drop these articles rather into the show notes. But she was looking at the response to Christians who have made it into spheres of high influence. So we've made mention of Christians and the notion of faithful presences, right? Which is essentially, being a holistic Christian in whatever setting you find yourself. But in the past, right, the evangelical culture in particular has really stressed cultural influence, strategic cultural influence, as a way to influence culture in a positive way and possibly even redeem the culture, or there are some big words that come in. So let's look at the reception of what's happening to some of these Christians who have now reached the top, so to speak. One of them would be Tish Warren Harrison. So Tish Warren Harrison is an Anglican priest along with her husband. She is best known probably for her book Liturgy of the Ordinary, which became it's a wonderful book, by the way, and it became a bestseller. She's a very skilled writer. She's now an op-ed writer for the New York Times. So very influential publication. We've also been talking a little bit. I know this is a long tee up, so just hang with me here. But Nathan and I have been talking a little bit and kicking around some of the debates surrounding winsomeness. So winsomeness has come under a lot of fire recently. Now, I think we can nuance that conversation, but essentially the notion that is being critiqued is that if we're really excellent in our communication, if we're very respectful, then that respect will be reciprocated by the wider culture, even those with whom we have very serious disagreements. That's the notion of winsomeness that's under criticism.
And let's say that by and large is true and does work that way, or has historically.
Yes.
Don't you think? Yeah. I mean, so that's not like rocket science there exactly. But the distinguishing characteristic is when it comes to whether or not it's a strategy, right?
Right. Yeah. No. So does this work in your everyday conversations? Yes. But does it work when we're talking about our cultural elites or key centers of influence? So what?
Dun, dun, dun.
Yeah. Well, so there the debate is very much a live one. And part of that has to do with the changing landscape of North American culture right now. And again, to bring in Aaron Wrenn, his article from First Things, where he laid out a little schematic that has been helpful, where he looked at the history of Christianity having three major phases in the United States. The positive one, where it was seen as a positive, a social good; a neutral, where it was kind of, it had a seat at the table, but it kind of had to prove itself; and then finally the negative world, which is the world we're in right now, where Christianity is seen as harmful, pernicious, not socially good, and but largely by our cultural elites. So that thesis seems to be being proven true many times over, and this is one such instance. Tish Warren Harrison wrote an article basically trying to celebrate what she put forward as a robust vision of pluralism. Saying, well, we Christians want to respect the rights of others, especially those with whom we have serious disagreements. The LGBTQIA plus community, obviously, we differ drastically on sexual ethics, but we can still be friends. But we extend that courtesy and that respect to this community, and that same courtesy ought to be, reciprocated. And so if there are people who, for instance, don't want to bake a cake for a gay wedding, and they're a private business, they shouldn't be forced to do so, or to design a website and so on. And she in the article, she proceeds as though we're all, this is largely beyond debate. We're all going to agree on this. Well, people don't all agree on that. And they had to find.
Enter the internet.
Yeah, right. And then cue the internet. 1,000 comments later, the New York Times had to shut the comments down. They were coming in too fast. People were calling her, a bigot and just railing against her. So the respect did not come through. That reciprocity did not come through either. So the winsomeness here, so the argument is going, is it's not working. This is a different world, and it's not going to work. The reference was made once again to the football CEO in Australia, whose name is escaping me right now. We did do a podcast on this gentleman, who I think he survived 24 hours or 48 hours it was in his new role before he was basically forced to leave because of his membership at a church.
His pastor's sermon from 9 years ago.
His pastor's sermon from 9 years ago got him fired. That's exactly what happened. And then the pastor appeared on an Australian show. The host was an atheist and just lit into him. And this pastor again was going very much with the neutral world tactics. He was being incredibly nice and charitable and gentle, and it just, you hate to phrase it so crudely, it just was not working at all. But what made this article really interesting, and I'm almost ready to shut up here, was that Bethel brings in a counter example, and this is a retired Irish priest, Father Sheehy, and Father Sheehy gave a sermon. We'll drop the homily into the show notes. Here's the funny thing about it, Nathan. It is from this is a Catholic priest decrying the mortal sins of homosexuality, transgenderism, and abortion. I can't think of anything less radical for a Catholic priest to do.
Well, talk about being on
I mean,
brand.
yeah, I mean, this is pretty much just Catholics Catholicing. I mean, there's nothing unusual about
Yeah.
anything that he's saying.
1,500 years of continuity.
Right. This is just standard operating procedure. Now he's speaking very prophetically. He's speaking well. He's speaking compassionately. It's a rousing sermon.
Can we just pause on your phrase Catholics Catholicing a second?
I thought you would like that.
That's great. Thank you. That's Cameroning right there. Yeah.
Well,
you see what I did? Yeah.
So
Anyway.
people, probably
Okay.
about 20 people walk out, no surprise. And he addresses, and for those of you walking out, God help you. That's what he says. And then God bless you all. I mean, it's a very compassionate but very firm word of exhortation that he gives, and he's speaking prophetically. Well, swift consequences soon followed. He was chastised, I believe, even by his bishop. But he wouldn't back down. He just said, "No, I'm not. I've done nothing wrong, and I believe that this is right." And so he went on one of the radio shows. The host does the same thing to him, and is, quite, hostile, and really goes after him. But the difference with him is that he clearly he's nice in his responses, he's charitable, but he clearly doesn't care if the host likes him or not. He's not trying to win over the host, and he's not trying to sound cool. I guess the way I would put it, Nathan, and then I'm going to kick it over to you, he's willing to be reviled. And I think that's kind of where I wanna leave it for now.
Mhm. Okay, so 3 things pop into my mind. We'll get back around to the reviled the because we don't wanna be here's the issue that we have to wrap up by the end of this, is that on one hand, you and I are huge fans of
Right.
winsomeness. On the other hand, I think we're gonna have to clarify what are the
Mhm.
goals of winsomeness. That's where this is gonna go. So, all right, so 3 things that pop into my mind that I wanna discuss. So the first one is um, what I was thinking of in terms of the respect boomerang, coining a new phrase here. The respect boomerang. Like I throw out respect, it loops around and it comes back to me as respect. So Tish is saying, look, we can respect and disagree and still be community and expecting that to come back in the other direction toward the Christians. And that's not happening, right? So the respect boomerang is largely gone, particularly, and I think perhaps exclusively. No, I won't say exclusively, but particularly when you're doing this in an online
Mhm.
setting, um, or that form of cultural engagement. So the respect boomerang doesn't boomerang, however that works out. The other thing is that, or the second thing is like, and this is my concern for some larger social movements, is that if we think about how culture is changed, and you look at, for example, Martin Luther King Jr. as a key figure that we always point to as somebody who did this well. The reason that what he did worked is because he was pointing to the moral conscience of a people who weren't living consistently with what they said they believed, right? And so he could say to Christians, look, if you're claiming to believe this, your behavior is not matching your stated beliefs. And all I'm asking for is you to live consistently with that and look at the implications that that
Mhm.
consistency has on the way that you treat your black brothers and sisters and humans in general, right? So there was a fixed point that everybody to some degree was looking to or playing by that provided the ability to at least communicate in productive ways. And so what I think is gone, other than the respect boomerang doesn't work, is also a similar moral vision where we would say we all agree on this moral vision and you guys aren't living consistently with the agreed upon moral vision of what is good. When who's the guy who wrote the article you quoted at
Aaron
the
Wren.
beginning? Um, Wren. Yeah, when Aaron Wren writes that, he's essentially what he's saying when he gets to step 3 is there is no longer a collective moral vision that we're trying to figure out how to live well. Th that doesn't exist, and so how do you all point to something in order to gain traction or even the same linguistic framework to even discuss what's happening? So, when that goes out the window, so the respect boomerang is gone,
Mhm.
the core moral vision is gone, then the question is, well, what are we actually trying to do? What does strategy
Mhm.
look like? And so I think, clue me in if I'm wrong on this, that the differentiation and the piece that we're pulling apart here is to say winsomeness is a wonderful thing and it is a form of discipleship and Christ likeness, but it is not a strategy. And so when you think that winsomeness is the strategy by which you're going to change culture, you might have the wrong goal, but you also probably definitely have the wrong way to go about doing it. So I'm not quite comfortable saying that way just yet, but there's something there that we need to flesh out and parse out to say what is it exactly that we're
Well, let me
feeling
phrase
on
that a
this.
little bit more starkly. So, if you think of winsomeness as a strategy and it doesn't work, then then you'll likely drop it completely. And the temptation will be to say, yeah, we need to move into a more aggressive or antagonistic stance. Well,
We'll just get Elon Musk to do
well,
this
and
for
so
us.
yeah, and so basically fall into lockstep with culture warring tactics and strategies because but that makes it clear though, if you have a vision of winsomeness. Now, again, you can nuance this. You can nuance the strategy piece as well. But if you have a vision of winsomeness that is just strictly instrumental, that is, it needs to just get me these results, then, I mean, you're using it in a pretty manipulative way to begin with. And if we look to the scriptural precedent, we're called to love our Lord supremely and then love others as ourself. Now, I think we're finally at a place now because our culture is getting more hostile to Christianity. We're forced to confront a non-sentimental vision of love, which is great. We need to have that because for a long time love just sounded really soft and fluffy to people. That just means that you're really sweet to them and you're kind no. Love doesn't preclude confrontation. And if you've ever I mean, we all know this by the way. If you've dealt with a family member in the midst of addictions or something like that, I mean, tough love is a real thing and it is tough. And to the person on the receiving end of tough love, at the moment, it can feel like an absolute attack and it can feel like the opposite of love. And then you pray by God's grace that years later the individual will come to see that actually this was a severe mercy and this was true love because it took into consideration the what is best for this person. But if you understand love as only affirming what another person feels or what they want to do, that is a very different way of looking at love. See, the Christian vision of love, so it's predicated on a vision of what's good. You will the good for somebody else. But again, what you pointed out is really important, Nathan. The cultural consensus on what the good is, especially connected with human life, is completely up in the air now. There's no shared vision of what a human being is for and human destiny, any of that. Now
Mhm.
there is within the church. I mean, we have a powerful vision of human value, human life, human flourishing, because we have an author of our salvation and we have the church and we have God's word. But those are all of the I mean, that's what the culture outside the church doesn't recognize and doesn't respect and doesn't recognize any of that authority. And so part of it, I guess, to get back to the strategy element again, winsomeness I see as an outworking of loving one's neighbor. I don't see it as a political strategy. Now, it can serve a strategic purpose if you find yourself in certain very, high sectors of society and culture and you work on, you basically cultivate excellence in your work and in your comportment and in your presentations. Obviously that can take you to a certain level and that, you don't want to be sloppy and you don't want to be unkind and hostile because that will quickly lose favor. But it will only take you so far. I mean, we've seen again, we're seeing Christians in those very sort of elite sectors, and they're not getting that respect any longer. And I think the
Mhm.
temptation has been for a while to sort
Well,
of soft pedal some of those issues that are more countercultural, especially anything to do with sexual ethics. Yeah, but we don't want to focus so much on I mean, I've even heard it put like this. Well, we really want to focus on the good stuff, on love and reconciliation. And I mean, there's a certain truth to this, but we don't want to talk about we don't want to focus on sin and darkness and this is we don't want to be all fire and brimstone, but that's part of the truth as well. And now that those issues we're at a cultural juncture where those issues are just unavoidable, we're going to have to reevaluate why we were winsome or tried to be winsome or why we're nice to people in the first place. Was it out of deep seated conviction or were we trying to get something that we wanted from somebody else?
yeah. So is it because you care or because you care about them or you care about your yeah. Well, so the here's the thing, and I keep bringing this up. As you know, I've been preaching through Matthew for a long time. I think a lot of people are ready for me to be done with Matthew. But if you go through, I'm just looking at the example of Jesus here on the winsomeness theme. If you read through Matthew thoughtfully, by the time you get two-thirds of the way through, you are not surprised at all that
Mhm.
they want to kill
Yep.
him. I mean, like there's Jesus's vision of love and compassion. Um, I would say there's not a lot of winsomeness actually at all. I mean, he's attractive and compelling, but he is definitely not compromising on anything that's jumping into my mind. He is the biblical character who speaks the most about hell,
Mhm.
judgment, and damnation, and goes down in history as the most articulate speaker of love and
Mhm.
acceptance and embracing God's goodness at the same time. So there's really a very fascinating way that he does that, but it doesn't involve any type of capitulation. He never backtracks on anything, but he also doesn't really care what people think of him sometimes,
Mhm.
including his followers every now and then. So I think there's that link maybe back into where you were going of you're talking about the priest who really didn't care whether or not he was reviled, a sense of is the foundation of your confidence in what you believe and what you do and don't do as a Christian based off of something that is supported by the government or cultural mores,
Mhm.
or or can you hold what you know to be true independent? And because we've talked about here on here before about if you have an identity that has to be affirmed by culture and by the government and by external programming, that is not a stable identity. But there are Christians who are very much doing that and seeking that and craving it. Now, I'm not saying that it's nice when that not
Mhm.
nice when it happens, but let's be realistic about what the true foundation of who you are is. And it really doesn't have a whole lot to do with the comment section in the New York
Yeah, and
Times.
I think, a willingness to be reviled. There's a if you listen to, and we'll drop this into the show notes as well. If you listen to Father Sheehy's responses to the host on the radio show, at one point the guy says to him, "Well, how is it compassionate to tell people that they're going to hell? There's nothing compassionate about that." And he says, "Oh, compassion has been co-opted by the culture. True compassion means willingness to suffer alongside people and a willingness to tell them the truth." Dallas Willard, meeting my Dallas Willard quota here. I mean, he once pointed out. He said,
Yeah.
"If you want to really have a difficult life, just don't lie. Don't ever lie, and see what happens to you." And I think that's what came to my mind, by the way, when you were talking about Jesus's statements and his comportment in Matthew. I mean, he steadfastly tells the truth and he never lies. Just think about your average day. Think about your average week. And I'm not just talking about direct lies. I'm talking about when we soft pedal on certain issues or where we sort of stretch the facts a little bit. Think about all of that completely going away. Do away with all of that. And you'll have a picture of the basic need for basic discipleship being formed in Christ likeness, because it's going to take real power from on high to be a witness of the truth in a world that loves lies and loves to twist the truth and loves
Well,
manipulation.
y- y- so the twisting element is interesting to me there when you say that, because I was thinking as you were speaking that essentially on the conversation between the radio host and the priest, he's saying, "Well, how is it compassionate to do this?" There's a little bit of a sense, and he's not saying this, but I think there's room for thinking of it like this, where the priest could sort of say, "How dare you take my religious language and tell me
Mhm.
what it means?"
Sure. Yeah.
Right, and so, it seems like some of the soft pedaling that happens is what was it Francis Schaeffer who called it stealing cookies from the Christian cookie jar, of like, we're gonna borrow concepts from Christianity in order to critique Christianity. Now, there's a sense in which you can do that if you're asking it to be consistent with itself, but there's the other side of that of, do you as a Christian really think you know the truth and have a moral vision that is good? And is it true enough and good enough that you're willing to stick with it even when it's difficult, even if it does produce a little bit of conflict and tension in order for a better result on the other side of that. Now, where you have to be careful on that is that there are tons of people who would line up and say, "Yes, that's absolutely right." And but I'm not talking about culture warring here or like not backing down because that's some type of loss. I'm talking about like a genuine care
Yep.
for the other, not a fearful desire to preserve
Well,
the
there are
self.
two aspects of, well, there are two, I suppose, instantiations of winsomeness that I want to push against. The one is viewing it as nothing more than really an instrument of manipulation or political expediency. You're winsome to get something from somebody else because you have an agenda. The other is, and this one I think is is actually more prevalent and more insidious, and it's because it's just common to, because most of us are not writing opinion pieces for the New York Times. But it's just a desire to use it so that people will like us. I think that's really powerful. Because you know why? Because well, first of all, everybody wants to be liked. So there's the obvious. We want to be liked, we want to be loved, and we want to be accepted. But I think there's a particular pathology in the North American church when it comes to being wanting to being to this intense desire to be liked and accepted. And again, it has to do with that whole view of cultural influence as a positive thing. So we can, take back the culture. Some people would use words that strong. Others would just say no, just so we can have a positive influence, a good ripple effect. And part of that, here's all the language that you've heard before. Let's build bridges. Let's make beautiful stories and compelling pictures. Let's make movies that are just wonderful. And again, there's this intense desire to, let's write and let's do music that sounds really powerful and beautiful, and let's have this attractional model and bring people in. But you have to come, if winsomeness is just about people liking you, you're in deep trouble in a moment like this. But that's why the pastor of the church, and I can't judge the man's heart. I don't know where his thought and his thoughts and his heart were in that interview. But it is interesting to watch him there. He's caught flat-footed because he seems to be wanting to win over that host.
Yeah, so is that I don't know that that's a moral conflict as much as it is he's playing by the playbook of a game that no longer exists.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I would say he's playing by the playbook of a game that no longer exists. I think you put it real well there. Yeah. So I'm not faulting him for you know mistakenly operating in an older paradigm, but that's what we're trying to, I think, listeners, draw your attention to. That's what Bethel McGrew and some of these others are onto. Aaron Wrenn, they're onto something because the scene has changed. The temperature in the room is different now. And what's beautiful is that Father Sheehy could not be less relevant. He's an old man, retired Catholic priest, and he's just sticking to the wonderful, powerful, ancient truth of the church. I mean, there's a great part in the interview where the host says to him, he says, "Well, I mean, okay, so you mentioned abortion. Well, what about the democratic will of the people? They voted on that. Or do you not support the democratic will of the people?" And Father Sheehy goes, "Of course I support the democratic will of the people, but the democratic will of the people is not the criterion for truth. The criterion for truth is God's word and his church." And I mean, you just want to stand up and cheer and say, yes, but he's not saying, there's nothing radical about that. He's just saying what Christians have said down the ages. And it's always a countercultural message because it says, he's God, we're not. And I think and yes, we
Mhm.
have to be, and he doesn't care what, and so is he trying to does he win over the host with that? You bet he doesn't. The host, I mean, it's very clear that he despises everything that Father Sheehy is saying. But but Father Sheehy is, yeah,
Yeah, but here's the thing, Father Sheehy didn't set up the interview.
no, no, he didn't.
He was
Yep.
invited into it. So is really what's happening here. So if we look at a principle of like, okay, what do we do with this? You and I and the people who are listening, as we think about this, what we're confronting is a conflict in it's a conflict of cares. So it's not caring, it's just saying whose opinion or what matters most.
Right.
And so making a distinction in our mind it's not caring, it's just caring about something more.
Your priorities.
That will mean that we will have to care less about how we prioritize what some people think about what it is that we choose to do or not do.
Yes. And I think going hand in hand with that is the willingness to be reviled. Now, that doesn't mean, again, just to say this carefully, you're not actively going out and trying to get reviled. You're not trying to be antagonistic and obnoxious and get in people's faces, of course. And Father Sheehy throughout the interview is very respectful, but he stands his ground. He doesn't try to outmaneuver his host or say, well, I have gay friends, and I'm both of by the way, that happens with that to me. Those are some of the more embarrassing moments of those other exchanges with both Tish Warren Harrison and the pastor do that. And again, it's an understandable maneuver.
Mhm.
But it it sounds forced and it sounds manipulative. And Father Sheehy doesn't make those kind of protests. He stands his ground and also reorients the discussion and says, "No, but that's not here's what structures my whole vision of reality. Here's what guides it. It's not the democratic will
Mhm.
of the people. As important as that is, it's not the shifting cultural
Yeah.
mores. Have you looked in a history book? Do you know how often? I mean, culture just it moves all over the place. But I'm bound to the eternal God and
Yeah.
his and the unchanging God. And I believe human beings were made by him and for him."
Mhm. Yeah, so as we kind of wrap this up then, I was at a Mennonite church once and the preacher said a line that I've always remembered. He said, "You might experience persecution as a Christian, not because you're a Christian, but because you're an annoying person." um, which is very, very true. And I think there is a lot of what I see happening and going on of like, no, people aren't against you because of what you say you believe. People are opposed to your message because of the way that you are. So let's recognize that is a real thing, and that's really out there, and that's true. But then you got your Dallas Willard quote in. I'm going to throw in a Grandpa Rittenhouse quote here, who he said, "For the first 40 years of my life, I loved to argue with people about religion and spirituality and worldview and all of that." And he said, "And then for the last 51 years of my life, what I've been working on is," he said, "I try no longer to argue, but to testify to what I know to be true." And it seems like there's a subtle distinction there where there is a time of a right and wrong and a pushback and a wrestle with ideas. But as we move into a time in which we don't have quite the same playing field for, like, we don't all know the same wrestling moves, we don't have the same moral or linguistic framework to do that, that there will be a time in which you might not need to argue, but what you might need to do is simply testify to what you know to be true
Mhm,
and then leave it at that and allow the Lord to be the one who has the strategic use for your life, not for you to come up with a strategic role for yourself in the transformation of culture. And so this is definitely not stepping back from cultural engagement. It's about being obedient to the way that the Lord wants to have it done and allowing Him to be the quarterback who engineers the play. We run our part in it. We be winsome, not as a strategy, but we be Christ like in all situations, and then let the cards fall where they may and entrust them to the Lord, even if that means that things will not go well for us occupationally, financially, in our Twitter follower count, uh, whatever. We'll say, "Come what may, we want to be faithful, and we know that the Lord is good, and we'll testify to that and allow Him to work out the consequences and pay the bills that happen on the receipts that are accrued while we're living that out." So that's where I'm thankful for Beth L's coverage of this. We're thankful for Father Sheehy, and for the hundreds of thousands of other Christians who are faithfully doing this each day, who are being kind and compassionate and with real conviction that really is a part of the beautiful witness of the church. So, anyway, thanks for listening to Thinking Out Loud, podcast where we think out loud about current events and Christian hope. And if you found this content helpful, please feel free to pass it along and to share it with other people who would enjoy listening and thinking along with us. And again, we want to say, as we come here toward the end of the year, a special thanks to those of you who prayerfully and financially support the work that we do. We couldn't do it without you, and we have things we'd like to grow into in the future. And so we appreciate your support in all of those categories.
Thanks for listening to Thinking Out Loud. If you'd like to learn more about what we do, book Nathan or Cameron, or if you'd like to support us financially, whether through a one-time donation or on a monthly basis, you can do so on the donate page at www.toltogether.com. That's toltogether.com. And please consider leaving us a 5-star rating and sharing this content with your friends. It really does help.